in the case of a widespread power outage, suddenly the ability to barter using silver, which has a small enough value so it can be traded against some groceries. Suddenly it's going to be very practical and suddenly it's going to be very useful. And I think many people are suddenly going to realize just how practical it is to hold some physical gold and silver, and suddenly you're going to have a surge in demand. And this could actually make silver money again, simply because people see with their own eyes just how practical it is to hold it during times of emergencies.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in today. I do appreciate it. Imagine waking up one day and trying to turn on your computer or cell phone, but it won't turn on. When considering the current financial system, the power grid is often overlooked as a crucial component of day-to-day transactions. With many payment systems being digital today, what would happen to our economy if the grid were to go down? Oren, where does our power come from today, and would our current financial system be in trouble if the grid went down?
Yes, so I think nowadays we can't even imagine life without electricity and also without the internet. Now, the thing is that it's a relatively new phenomenon. I think people have had electricity in their homes for only about 100 years at max. And we've only been really dependent on electricity, I mean, as a society, I think since perhaps the 1960s or the 1970s. So it's a relatively new phenomenon, the extent to which we are reliant on this single infrastructure called the grid. And we kind of tend to forget that in order to have electricity, we constantly need to generate power and we constantly need to maintain that grid. So there's people, doing the maintenance work in order to keep that electricity going. So where does our electricity come from? What are our sources of energy? So it may surprise everyone, but we're still mostly reliant on coal. 34% of electricity globally comes from burning coal. Next in line is natural gas, 22%, other fossil fuels, only 3%. And nowadays, we also have all those renewable sources of energy, for instance, hydro, which is responsible to 14% of global power, wind, 8%, and solar energy, 7%. Now, another source of energy, which I'm afraid is not more common, is, of course, nuclear energy, which is responsible for only 9% of total global energy production. Now, I say that it's a very unfortunate thing that nuclear is not more widespread. Well, because it could have been abundant. It could have supplied us with an abundant amount of cheap energy if we were to invest properly in constructing all those nuclear reactors, but mainly due to political reasons, mainly due to the fact that people are afraid of nuclear energy. We haven't developed that energy source. We haven't developed it sufficiently. So, and as a matter of fact, as we're going to see later on in this show, certain countries are even phasing out existing nuclear power. So right now we are reliant either on fossil fuels or on renewables. And as we're going to see, that's kind of problematic.
Right. Well, how stable would you say our grid is today? And how much of that power that we're using that's renewable, makes our grid less stable?
Yes, so that's something that people are completely unaware of. The fact that the introduction of renewable sources of energy is destabilizing the power grid. We assume that, As long as the power is on, we assume that it's perfectly fine and there are reasonable and responsible people managing it. But in recent years,
Right.
we've seen this push to transition towards renewable sources of energy due to the fear of global warming, due to the fear of climate change affecting our planet, affecting our ecosystem. So the incentive to switch from fossil fuels to renewables, the incentive behind it is not the stability of the system, not the continuous ability to supply energy to the population. There are other incentives there affecting decision makers. So the thing about renewables is that they're intermittent. Solar energy doesn't work when the sun doesn't shine. And of course, wind turbines don't work when the wind doesn't blow. And this means that there are variables. So you have more energy during the day, and of course, you have more energy during certain times of the year. And it is very difficult for a grid, an energy grid, to deal with this intermittent nature of these energy sources. And you either have to store energy, which is difficult and requires a lot of investment in infrastructure, or you need to keep backup energy sources available at all times so that they can instantly kick in whenever there is a drop in the yield from the renewable sources. And this is exactly what we see, for instance, in Germany. So Germany decided back in the day, a few years ago, to switch to renewable sources of energy. Well, first, it decommissioned its nuclear power plants. It decided to do so in 2011, and it gradually shut down all its nuclear power plants, and the last three were shut down in 2023.
Wow.
And yeah, and it is aiming at reaching 80% production from renewables by 2030. Currently, it stands at 59%, coming from solar and wind. And the problem is there's not enough storage capacity, so they need to keep power plants which are fueled by natural gas at all times. But even the supply of natural gas, as we've seen, wasn't guaranteed. In September of 2022, we've had that incident in which the Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany were sabotaged, and three out of the four pipelines were destroyed. And this, of course, endangered the ability of Germany to continue supplying electricity to its people. And luckily for them, they had enough other sources. They didn't have a huge power outage, but it does demonstrate the fragility of the system. The fact that they are so reliant on renewable sources of energy and they don't have enough backup, traditional sources of energy to back them up. But we have seen the prices of electricity in Germany rising. And electricity in
Oh,
Germany nowadays is so expensive that certain industries which need power, a lot of power in order to operate, they're shutting down. So we're seeing this process of deindustrialization due to the fact that power is too expensive and there's not enough of it, and they're too reliant on sources, renewable sources of energy, which are intermittent. And we've also seen similar problems across the world, for instance, in Spain, in South Australia, in California, in Texas, etc.
that is crazy that Germany is shutting down that many of their nuclear power plants. And the fact that they're having to deindustrialize really just shows that this is something that can put your nation in a really bad position. So the incentives today are not in line with having a stable grid. Spain had experienced a blackout earlier this year. Now, what caused that blackout? Did that have anything to do with renewable energy sources?
Yes, that's an excellent example of the problem that we're witnessing today. I want to read you an article from CNN about the massive blackout that we've seen in Spain and Portugal earlier this year. They say Spain's government said Tuesday that the massive April power outage across Spain and Portugal that left tens of millions of people disconnected in seconds was caused by technical and planning errors that left the grid unable to handle a surge in voltage. Now, notice the following sentence. Ecological Transition Minister Sarah Agassiz, who manages the nation's energy policy, told reporters that a voltage surge led to small grid failures, mainly in the south of Spain, which then cascaded to larger ones and brought the system down in the two Iberian Peninsula nations. I just want you to notice what is her title. She's not the energy minister, she's the ecological transition minister, which shows you like their priorities. It shows you that they prioritize the ecological transition, transitioning to renewable sources of energy, rather than keeping the stability of the electricity grid and delivering electricity to their nation. So it shows you that their priorities are upside down, and eventually it's going to lead to such cases where you have massive power outages. And they go on saying, she ruled out that the failure was due to a cyber attack. The outage began shortly after noon on April 28th and lasted through nightfall, disrupting businesses, transit systems, cellular networks, internet connectivity, and other critical infrastructure. Spain lost 15 gigawatts of electricity, or about 60% of its supply. Portugal, whose grid is connected to Spain, also went down. Only the country's islands and territories were spared. So you can see that even a relatively small malfunction at a certain area can cascade into a complete collapse of the entire grid.
Right. And that is crazy that their priority is not to ensure that the power stays on, but to ensure that they're getting a certain percentage of the power from renewable resources.
Yes.
Now, if we want to have uninterrupted access to electricity, is nuclear power the best option, or would you say it's really too dangerous for the environment to be one of our primary power sources?
Well, back in the day, nuclear reactors were a bit more dangerous than they are today. You had the potential of meltdown, but it was only due to the way in which they were constructed or designed in the first place. Modern nuclear reactors are designed in such a way in which they can't melt down. They are designed in such a way that if they malfunction for any reason, they simply shut down automatically. And it's built into
Interesting.
their design, into the way they are constructed. So they will shut down automatically if there's any problem. And as a matter of fact, we are seeing nowadays designs, nuclear reactor designs, which are smaller. They're about the size of let's say, a trailer,
Okay.
and you can bury them underground and they will automatically, without any supervision, supply power to, let's say, a neighborhood for 100 years.
That sounds pretty nice.
So there are solutions. It's simply very difficult to construct new nuclear installations because there's political resistance to that. And the process, the red tape is enormous. I heard somewhere, I read somewhere that if you wanted nowadays to construct a new nuclear power plant in the US, just getting it approved would take 20 years.
Wow, that's crazy. That
So
just seems like an unreasonably long amount of time.
yes. So naturally, power companies, like who can even guess or know what kind of power demand we'll have in 20 years? So who can even embark on such a project when there's so much uncertainty surrounding it? So, and
That's a good point.
at the same time, you get economic incentives, you get subsidies if you construct solar power plants or wind turbines, they get subsidies and they get encouraged by the government. So it's much easier to go for that solution, even though these are intermittent sources of energy and they contribute to the instability of the grid.
Right, absolutely. And I know some of the incentives out here are in the form of renewable energy credits. And so the idea is if homeowners put up grids that provide more power than their home needs, then the power company can buy that power back from them to put it into the rest of the grid. And so, yeah, I mean, talk about intermittent. I mean, they don't have a good handle on how well these people are maintaining their systems. All of these systems are going to be various ages.
Now,
And
don't get me wrong. I see why, for instance, for people who are off the grid, for instance, solar can be a great solution. You know,
sure,
I can't
absolutely.
fault them for wanting solar energy when that's either the only solution or the cheapest solution they can come up with. But if you look at it systemically, if you look at the grid as a whole, then having too much solar and wind is not good. When there are a small, only a small percentage of your energy mix, then it's fine. The system can handle the intermittent nature of these sources of energy, of the renewables, when it's a small percentage. But when they become like the majority of your power generation, then it becomes a huge problem.
Right, absolutely.
And our politicians, they as though don't have the incentive to even deal with this problem. See what I mean?
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, you never hear them talking about the instability of the grid. It just
It's
doesn't
like
come up.
it's just something that we take for granted. It's a miracle that we still have such a reliable electricity grid, and it's only thanks to, those engineers working all the time to maintain the grid and try to mitigate all those problems. The question is, how long can they do it? How long will they be able to do it when we're constantly throwing at them a more and more difficult situation?
Right, we're constantly making their job harder.
Yes. Now, the next topic that I wanted to
So,
talk about is not something which is man-made. It's something which is natural, and it's called solar flares. These are as though magnetic storms. They're called geomagnetic storms. They come from the sun. The sun, at times, it has those eruptions of electromagnetic radiation.
yeah, a coronal mass ejection.
Yes, it usually
Right.
happens together with coronal mass ejections, and it can result, when we're talking about a strong event, this could potentially induce currents in unshielded electronic systems and fry them.
Oh,
And
right. And an electromagnetic pulse, I mean, if it was a big one, it could instantly cripple our power grid, bring our entire tech-dependent society to a standstill. And of course, these CMEs can produce the electromagnetic pulses that could potentially lead to these types of failures in a power grid. I mean, it would be safe to assume that your computer or smartphone will be some of the most fragile electronic items in your possession if they were exposed to an event like this. If you could imagine not even being able to hook your device up to power, but then let's say you could hook it up to power and then the device didn't work.
yes, it's true. Your personal devices, they are, of course, vulnerable to a strong solar flare, but they can relatively easily be replaced. And if I compare
Right.
that to the grid, if I compare that to our infrastructures, if it fries them, if it fries the grid, then it's a lot more difficult to repair. So I just want to add a bit more information about it. So the sun, it has those 11-year long cycles of magnetic activity. We
Okay.
are currently in the middle of cycle number 25 since we started making records back in 1755. And there are times in which the sun is exceptionally active. And we have, for instance, a historical event called the Carrington event. Now, the Carrington event happened in September of 1859. This was during solar cycle number 10. And this was the most intense geomagnetic storm ever recorded. Now, just imagine it was during the 19th century. So the study of electricity was in its infancy, and we didn't have a lot of infrastructure that used electricity. The main infrastructure that used electricity back then were telegraph lines. And even though there was very little infrastructure that could have been affected by the event, we still observed and recorded sparks and even fires in telegraph stations.
Wow.
Yes. And also there were those northern lights. Yes.
Yes.
The aurora borealis. It was seen, it was viewed all over the planet because,
Yikes.
yes, the amount of radiation that hit the atmosphere was so great that you could see those northern lights everywhere. And the event was recorded by two British astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson. Okay, so a geomagnetic storm of this magnitude, if it were to happen today, it would wreak havoc.
Oh, I bet. And so it sounds like if you see northern lights in an area where you've never seen them before, that's a good warning sign. An event like this has just taken place, and
Yeah,
you might not be able to turn on some of your electronics, or maybe there will be some fires breaking up.
by the time you see the northern lights, it's probably too late to do anything about it. I mean, it's already hit the atmosphere. I do think that they have early warning signs. For instance, I think NASA is recording the magnetic activity of the sun, and they do have some systems for early warning, and they are able to give you a warning ahead of time. But even if we do get a warning, I'm not sure it's going to help because we have such huge infrastructure which can't be simply shielded overnight. It takes too
N
much
No
work
way.
to start shielding all our power lines, all our high voltage power lines. We can't do that.
Yeah, there is no way. I mean, if an individual had a Faraday cage that they could put down in their basement or something, and they could run and put their devices in there, maybe they could protect a few of their personal items. But like you had mentioned earlier, these are going to be some of the easiest things to replace. You can just go to the phone store and get a new phone, potentially.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, a Faraday cage is simply a casing, a metal casing, which is connected to the ground and blocks any electromagnetic radiation from entering the box. And
Yes,
yeah, and you can shield your personal devices, such as your phone or your computer, in a Faraday cage, but you can't surround the entire power grid with a Faraday cage. It's sprawling all over the country. It's too big. It's you can't do that. It's not practical. So
right.
right now the grid is exposed. Now I think the most vulnerable piece of the grid is what we call the electrical transformers. And when it comes to the grid, to high voltage power lines, you need transformers in order to step up or step down voltage levels.
So these are like really important to the overall grid. I mean, and it sounds like these probably aren't easy to replace. I mean, is this something where if the grid went down, let's just say there was a fast pulse EMP surge in the system and it took a bunch of these transformers down, are there like warehouses full of them, or would we be in a lot of trouble if like a bunch of these got damaged?
We're going to be in a lot of trouble. We're talking about very large devices which use
Okay.
induction to step up or step down voltage levels. They can be the size of a room, and usually they're custom made. So the large
Dang.
ones, the big ones that deal with high voltage lines, you can't go to the hardware store and just buy a new one. They have to be custom made, and it takes months to construct such a transformer according to local specifications, and they can't just be easily replaced. And if you have a big enough geomagnetic storm, it can fry the transformers and shut down the power grid for weeks, if not months.
Right. I mean, and it sounds like potentially even years. If you could imagine a whole bunch of cities all trying to get access to transformers, and then also the limitation of people who are certified to work with the high voltage systems. It sounds like it could be a real mess.
Yes. The thing about transformers is that right now there are very few companies, corporations that construct them because of course they were added to the grid very gradually over the years. Every time that you needed to expand the grid, so you constructed another of those transformers or perhaps replaced a small one with a larger one. So we don't have the capacity to manufacture them en masse. We only
I
have a
see.
small capacity to add one or two every now and then because this is the way the grid evolved. You never had a sudden demand for huge amounts of those transformers. So we don't have the capacity to manufacture them en masse, suddenly. And if you have this kind of event, which is global, for instance, and suddenly every grid in every country needs those transformers to replace the ones that got fried, that got destroyed, then you have this bottleneck. And
Right.
it's going to take a long time to replace, not because we don't have the technology, we know how to create transformers, just because we don't have the manufacturing capacity ready at hand.
That's a good point. So we will be in deep trouble if there is widespread outages and a bunch of these
Yes,
transformers get
yes.
get damaged.
Yes, and this is why I see the potential for a power outage, a global power outage, which will last not a day or two, but months. The power is going to return very gradually, but it's going to take them perhaps months to fully restore the grid all over the country and all over the world.
Right. It would be a total mess getting it all set up again.
Yes. And of course, by the time you fix the problem and all those systems which are currently reliant on electricity, well, they've already been abandoned and you
Oh
already had
yeah,
to find
definitely.
alternatives. So trying to get back to the current situation is going to be very difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Is there any way for us to protect the grid from EMPs, that would be realistic?
Yeah, so the good news is that there are efforts to mitigate the risk of a large geomagnetic event, a large geomagnetic storm. So there are a few federal programs to protect the grid against such a scenario. For instance, the Western Area Power Administration installed the first US commercially developed NBD, which stands for Neutral Blocking Device at White Substation in South Dakota in November of 2022. And it was successfully tested during a geomagnetic storm in February of 2023. So there are things that we can do, there are devices that we can install in order to reduce the effect of a surge on the grid. But only a handful of these have been installed thus far. So most of the grid is still vulnerable.
Well, hopefully they'll get some MBDs set up in your area, in my area, and all the listeners' areas before too long, because that would be nice to have that peace of mind that at least that was there to help mitigate, this is a problem.
Yes.
Now, I know a big concern has been high altitude nuclear detonations. This is sometimes brought up as a threat to the grid. How effective do you think an attack like this would be if the goal was to take down the power grid across, let's say, like an entire nation?
Yes, that's a good point. These are what we call EMPs, electromagnetic pulse weapons, which simulate the same effect of a solar flare. If you detonate a nuclear bomb at a high altitude, for instance, you're not trying to kill the population, but you're just trying to generate this pulse, this electromagnetic pulse, which will fry all the electronic systems in the country and make it easier for you, for instance, to invade that country, to take over, or perhaps it's just a terrorist attack. You're trying to destroy the economy of a developed nation by
Sure.
detonating such a weapon in its sky. And that's a completely possible scenario. Of course, you need a country which has a nuclear weapons program to begin with in order to detonate such a weapon. And for instance, you have Iran. I know many
Sure.
Americans don't think that Iran is a threat to them, to the mainland.
Right.
But just the other day, I've read an Iranian official from, the Iranian military, which threatened, he actually threatened the US that although they don't have, the missiles in order to deliver a nuke all the way to the United States, he said, hey, we
Hmm.
can send a ship close enough to the United States so we can launch a missile at the United States, and you should be careful. Of course, that was said after those recent attacks on their nuclear weapons program, and they're trying to deter the US from trying to intervene in that program in the future.
I see. Well, they might want to be careful making comments like that because the current administration, I could see them sending more B-2 bombers if they got irritated with the way that they were talking. Uh,
Definitely, but you see, the Iranians, they don't mind making threats. They constantly make threats. The thing is, it's rarely that those threats are actually reported on the mainstream media. So I think most Americans are not aware of just how bellicose, how belligerent the Iranians really are, because they're not really listening to what they're saying.
Interesting. Yeah, I never really hear anything about Iran in any way, shape, or form.
Yes. So the risk of a surge that will fry the grid, it exists both from a natural magnetic storm, also as a military risk from a nation such as Iran.
Right, absolutely. So, two potential ways that this could happen. Now, it does seem like our current financial system is very reliant on the power grid, with most payments being digital today. What would happen to our economy if the grid went down?
Just imagine there's this push by governments in recent years to cancel, to phase out physical paper cash. And they want all our payments to be digital, and they want you to use either your credit card or your Apple Pay or your Venmo or whatever digital payment system. And they want you to be reliant on those payment systems. And if the grid is disrupted, that means that pretty much all those payment systems are unavailable.
Right. Yeah, but they're so interested in tracking us, tracking what we're doing with our money. They've completely left the fragility of this grid out of their minds when they're making these decisions. And yeah, that would be a really messy situation if the grid was to go down,
So cash
right?
is going to still work as long as we do have some cash and people have some cash. So you can go to the store and you can use that cash. But people are going to run out of cash very quickly. And the ATMs are not going to work. And I seriously doubt it if bank tellers will be able to help you or give you cash because they won't have access to their computer systems as well. Now, it's true that
Right. That's a good point.
certain systems do have backup. I mean, for instance, I read that the New York Stock Exchange, their data center, it's powered by the grid, but they also have generators, diesel generators that can power that data center for days or weeks, and they can always refuel and they can continue operating the New York Stock Exchange indefinitely. But I'm not sure it's even going to help if the New York Stock Exchange is still working, but no one can access it because you at your home, you don't have power, for instance, or even if you do have a generator or you have solar power, but your internet service provider doesn't have power. And you see what I mean?
Right.
For the
Yeah.
for the system to work, you need everyone in between to have power and to be operating. And I can't see how our economy, the way it is set up today, how it can possibly function without power and without the internet. I think we're we're pretty much going to devolve back to back to a barter economy very quickly. I mean, like within days. And certainly within the large cities, I think we're staring at the potential for absolute chaos.
Right. No, I think you're totally right. I don't think the system's set up for it at all. That's interesting that the stock exchange does have diesel generators on backup. Most of the major hospitals have that as well. So you'll see certain things here and there that are still up and running, but you're right. The people in the cities, they don't stockpile food. There might be an occasional prepper in the city, but for the most part, they don't. And there would be a lot of problems if they did have cash and they could go to the grocery store. Well, within a pretty short amount of time, you're going to be down to just the non-perishable items because all of the frozen section, everything in the refrigerated section, all that stuff's going to go bad, pretty quick. So we could have a real problem on our hands.
Yes.
Now, some people seem to be under the impression that cryptos would be relatively unaffected by a power outage, but perhaps even by a long power outage. Without a working grid up, let's just say someone had power at a remote location, how effectively would they still be able to use their cryptos?
That's a good
Yes.
question. I'm not an expert on crypto. I'm guessing that the widespread power outage will affect cryptocurrencies and disrupt them. And, take for instance, Bitcoin, which relies on, those miners. So the hash rate is going to fall, probably slower transaction confirmations.
Right.
Look, this system, I know that this system was designed so it can withstand disruptions to the network. It was set up this way, but I don't think it was ever put to the test. This is going to be the first time in which we're seeing crypto try to deal with problems with the infrastructure which it relies on, which is, the power and the internet.
Right. Absolutely. It would be interesting to see, like you had said, the transaction speeds would be slowed down. And I mean, and they might come to dang near a standstill, trying to do these checks if there was only a certain amount of them available at the various nodes to do the checks for the transactions. And it wouldn't surprise me if during an event like this, once people did come to the realizations that this actually isn't going to work well if the grid is down. If we saw them lose quite a bit of value,
Yes.
it wouldn't
Eh,
surprise
eh,
me if we saw that.
yes, I think that's even a bigger risk to crypto. People start to realize how dependent those cryptocurrencies are on infrastructure, which is, beyond their control, and that people are going to try and sell those cryptos because they're going to want other assets which are, not dependent on the grid and not dependent on the internet, such as precious metals. And that could induce a massive sell-off that in itself will risk the future of cryptocurrencies.
Right, absolutely. Now, because gold and silver were considered to be money for such a long time, we're talking thousands of years globally, it would make sense that there would be widespread acceptance of either metal for goods or services in a grid down situation. Could you see them effectively becoming money again in a situation like this? And what form of gold or silver do you think might be the most effective for trading or bartering?
Yes, so obviously gold and silver who work, quote unquote, even when you don't have power, when you don't have electricity and you don't have the internet, their value is independent. They don't need any infrastructure to back them up. And so you're going to be able to count on your physical gold and silver to still be respected, accepted by perhaps not all stores and not all merchants, but at least some of them. I'm guessing that in the case of a widespread power outage, suddenly the ability to barter using silver, for instance, what we call junk silver or constitutional silver, that fractional silver, which has a small enough value so it can be traded against some groceries. suddenly it's going to be very practical and suddenly it's going to be very useful. And I think many people are suddenly going to realize just how practical it is to hold some physical gold and silver, and suddenly you're going to have a surge in demand. And this could actually make silver money again, simply because people see with their own eyes just how practical it is to hold it during times of emergencies. And even when the emergency is over, I'm guessing that people are still going to have the memory of that event and they're going to want to hold some of it at their home just in case such an emergency returns. And that, I believe, eventually will make silver money again.
I could definitely see that making a lot of people think, hey, I need to have at least a small amount of this around in case there's an emergency again like this, because I wasn't prepared last time and I'm not going to get caught with my pants down twice, you know?
Yes. Now, once power is restored, I'm quite certain that there's going to be a huge pressure on governments across the world to roll back all those plans to phase out cash, for instance. They're going to have to reconsider the entire idea of relying on electricity and relying on the internet for the entire economy, because that means you don't have any redundancy. You have nothing to fall back on. So, in order to have that redundancy, you need to have physical cash, hopefully, physical gold and silver. And hopefully, they will recognize that you need to have physical money so the economy wouldn't be completely disrupted if such an event returns. Thank you for listening to the Silver Hermit podcast. If you like this content, please donate in the link which appears in the description below. Please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Remember, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This video is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be regarded as investment advice. Before taking any investment decision, please consult with a professional financial advisor who may assess your personal investment objectives and needs.